Oh, bother.
Hello everyone, Yin Yang Total War here, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different, and hopefully, if you guys like it, it's something we'll be doing every Thursday going forward in a new series I've dubbed Yin Yang's Hot Takes. In this series, I will be giving my opinion about all kinds of topics concerning Total War and possibly branching out into strategy gaming or even beyond. Now, I am not an opinion channel, right? So I will be keeping this contained to 1, maybe 2 days a week if something big happens, but I think that I do have a unique perspective coming from my background, and hopefully it's one that resonates with a part of the gaming community that I believe is underrepresented in terms of our thoughts and opinions. That being said, it's about time that we talked about the Creative Assembly, what is happening within the community, and Total War at large. If I am a little late to the podium on this, I hope that you understand it's because I don't like to speak on developing situations until the dust begins to settle and we can see the big picture. Now, hear me when I say this. I don't have any inside information on what is going on. Neither CA nor most of the bigger content creators even know that I exist, and no one is confiding in me about any specifics. This video is not targeted at any individuals, and I hope it doesn't come off that way, because it's really just the perspective of a longtime fan of the series who also happens to be a social media moderator, a small-time modder, a YouTuber, of course, and someone who not too long ago departed the corporate world where I worked for a company that was structured much in the same way that CA is currently. So, let's get started with the $100 million elephant in the room, that being hyenas. There's a lot that can be said about this nightmare. For one thing, it didn't stick to the original design according to ex-CA dev Valent, and I want to say that he said this during an interview in the Great Book of Grudge, or on the Great Book of Grudges channel, so shout out to both of those guys. But according to Valent, this game was supposed to be a gritty, dark, like team shooter where you'd go in, you'd accomplish a mission, you'd get back out before you got overwhelmed, which is in line with the fact that it was also originally built off of the Alien Isolation engine, and that's something that I'll touch on in just a second. But for those of you who don't know, Alien Isolation is a really cool game, and I would suggest that you at least go and watch some videos on it. If not, check it out for yourself. I'm sure it's pretty cheap by now. But that aside, it turned from that, which sounded kind of cool, into like a Overwatch Fortnite mix with Sega collectibles, and like, who was interested in that? Nobody. But regardless, it shouldn't have even been on CA's plate to begin with, as it clearly wasn't in their wheelhouse. And I'm not saying that CA cannot make things other than Total War. They're not exactly a one-note developer, but I mean, you can't go from Alien Isolation to Fortnite, right? Even CA's other games that they made, Halo Wars, and Spartan Total Warrior, which I know Total War, but it's Total War-esque. It's really a God of War clone, and another game that I deeply suggest you go and check out if you can find a copy in a PlayStation 2 to play it on. That being said, we will never know who pitched this idea or the subsequent changes, but knowing what we do now, it's pretty easy to imagine a series of events that caused this utter failure. Now, I'm going to be referring quite a bit in this video to a Volan video, where he goes over basically his what he calls like the collapse of CA. But while I don't appreciate his overly cynical nature that he has, because he's kind of been at war with CA for a while, but I will say that his discussions with former CA staff help give some insight here, specifically when he talks about the more or less stagnant player base that Total War caters to. Profitable, right? But stagnant nonetheless. This is where my own knowledge is going to come in a little bit. So, the goal of a corporation, if you've never been to business school, or just don't happen to know anyway, is to make money to return to the shareholders that invest in the company. Now, CA being a subsidiary has that same motivation. However, now it only has one shareholder that holds the purse strings. This makes CA more like a hotel in a hotel chain or a unit in the military rather than a more democratic affair like if it stood alone. If you lose a few shareholders as a standalone company, you can always go and hunt for more. If the corporation overseeing you loses faith, they'll just shutter you. An example of this is how food budgets work in the US military, and hopefully Uncle Sam doesn't come after me for saying this, but in many units, especially in the reserve component, a quick look at the budget would have you thinking that every soldier eats every meal at the dining facility. This is obviously not the case, but mandates will be put in place for soldiers to mark themselves as having been eaten, not having been eaten, but having eaten with the unit, so that that unit doesn't see budget cuts in case the mission requirements change and require soldiers to physically be present at the unit when they would normally go out to eat. This is going to bring us to our scenario. So one of two things happened here. Either the idea was internal or came from above, but for the sake of brevity, let's say that it came from Sega. This is likely because Sega would want to break into what was the lucrative market of multiplayer flashy shooters. That's fair enough. When the idea was born, it probably seemed like a really good one, in fact. Now, let's say that you're a CA, or not a CA, but you're a Sega executive. You have one of three options. Create a studio to support such an adventure. That's expensive and pretty risky. Partner with another company to make it happen. Kind of like when Sega partnered with, I believe it was Rebellion Studios, to make Alien vs. Predator video game. It was okay. It was pretty cool, I guess. But that's kind of the same kind of situation that would be. And in hindsight, it probably would have been the better option, but it would have meant more profit and licensing sharing for Sega, which would end up being less lucrative overall. Or option 3, give it to one of your subsidiaries who already has the infrastructure in place, requiring less investment than starting from the ground up, and it maximizes the profit on the back end, which, because there's no profit sharing with a company that you own. From CA's perspective, while Sega might not have been holding a gun to their head and telling them to make the game, they are holding a bag of money in front of them with promises of funding for other projects, additional infrastructure, and an opportunity for CA to grow beyond the same limited pool that Total War has been catering to for so long. Now, keep in mind that CA is still a company, and the rule that is beaten into your head over and over again when you're in business school is you will expand or you will die. And that's something that is going to influence a lot of these decisions. Eventually, a resource will be used up, and you must be able to rely on other resources to keep that money coming in, or you'll disappear. That resource is us, by the way. Now, I'm sure that what many of you gathered from that little spiel is that Sega got greedy, CA got greedy, executives bad, and they don't care what we want. You're not wrong, but this agreement did happen to coincide with a lot of content for Total War. While recent memories may be muddy, right? The waters may be muddy on that. I'd argue that since Hyenas was greenlit in 2017 and the following years, things have been pretty good. Warhammer 2 and its subsequent Mortal Empires, Thrones of Britannia, Three Kingdoms, Rome Remastered, Troy, Warhammer 3 and Mortal Empires, as well as a metric ton of DLC in between. Not to mention the fact that Rome 2 returned with updates thanks to the team at CA Sophia. Now, there's going to be detractors from each one of these projects. just as there are going to be those who celebrate them. But regardless on which side you fall, you really can't deny how much attention our games have gotten over the past 6 years. While every commenter with no knowledge of game development or business in general can tell you that time would have been spent building a better game opposed to churning content, love it or leave it, or love it or hate it, content is what we got. That brings us to 2023 and by proxy 2022. But I will touch on that later. This is where the House of Cards comes toppling down. Now, I can't say for sure how CA spent the money, and you could say that it all went into Hyenas, but it's pretty doubtful that that was the case. But regardless, you can almost feel the panic from the company's actions this last year. The rise in prices could be blamed on post-COVID inflation, but who here's buying that? Then there is the quote-unquote rising costs. Again, that's something I'm going to touch on later. But you can see that things take a downward spiral very rapidly, starting from the Chaos Dwarfs. And hey, we love the Chaos Dwarfs, right? They brought us the unique mechanics, tuned up mechanics, a whole new roster. Maybe it was a ton of reskins, but we don't care because the DLC felt full and enjoyable. Most were even able to overlook the price because, hey, these are the Chaos Dwarfs. We've been waiting for them since game 1. But something was off. We received a legendary hero instead of a legendary lord, which, I mean, was the only real major gripe, but it was still a gripe. And really the fact that we were losing a legendary lord in race packs, I mean, that wasn't a huge problem. However, the hidden message that most, including myself, failed to understand, that was the real issue. CA were telling us all the way back then that this is the way things are going to be from now on. Rich Aldridge even tried to warn us in his own way during an interview with the Great Book of Grudges. Once again, shout out to that guy, Nathan over there, that we were moving towards the end of different DLC tiers and a higher price tag for each DLC. Now, of course, he couldn't say that, but that's what he was alluding to. That warning became a stark reality with our next topic, which unfortunately is going to be the Shadows of Change. Now, I've discussed my outlook on the Shadows of Change before, and while I'm happy to own the DLC, obviously there are some issues that I just can't see past. Mother Estancia feels tacked on. It's just too obvious with her campaign. It's disconnected from even her own lore. The Lord and Hero choices we were accustomed to were clearly cut. The Hags were supposed to be Hag Mothers. The Akshina were supposed to be heroes. And we were supposed to get a lot more units. And that's pretty obvious. I mean, Cathay had a Gate Master that was left out of the DLC, but featured prominently in the book that promoted the DLC. And alternatively, there could have been like a Onyx Crow hero that would have been really thematic for Yuan Bo as like an assassin type hero. Tzeentch got 2 legendary heroes, which is cool, but no generic lord or hero options. Why? We could have at least gotten a Bray Shaman hero. You put you have Bray Shamans, you have Zongors, you could have just put them together and there you go, we got a Zongor as a hero for Tzeentch. I don't know why that couldn't have been a thing, but hey, again, I'm not on the inside. Instead of like the things in the woods, we could have jammed 3 or 4 Uncle units into Kislev, and that would have been a reskin of Kossars. But as I said before, if the reskins are good, we don't care as long as we're getting that content, right? And bam, you're done. It's not a great DLC, but it's a good DLC at that point. But instead of all the content, or instead of a content blitz to make up for all the things that were definitely going wrong under the hood, it seems like CA was cutting as many corners as possible to maximize profit ahead of Sega's decision. Whether these corners were cut because of a lack of time or just to, again, maximize profits before Sega decided how many heads it could mount on its proverbial wall, we can't know. But these decisions and the attempt to explain instead of rectify seemed to be a tipping point for many in the community. And of course, we have to talk about the statement. I don't want to, but we're going to have to. And I said that I wouldn't go after individuals in this video, but damn it, Rob, you couldn't just stay the villain we didn't know. Oh no, he had to reveal himself to be the big bad. Now, there's rumors this guy's getting axed along with many others, but there's no confirmation. Regardless of his current position, he can definitely be accredited with lighting the powder keg. His veiled threat that support would be pulled for the project if people didn't buy the DLC was possibly the worst thing that he could have said at the moment. Anyone who took an introductory class in public relations could have told you that. Now try to hear me out before dedicating the next hate post to me over on Reddit, but this is where the community becomes its worst enemy. We get so caught up in dissecting the current drama that we can't see the forest for the trees. Is Rob's statement wrong? Like, is it the wrong thing to say given the situation? Yeah. It's tone deaf and narcissistic, and that would be putting it lightly. But he was telling us the truth, or at least a version of it. Now, it's natural to focus on what's affecting you on an individual level, but when we have a greater context to work with, it's definitely healthy to go back and re-examine actions taken by another. So let's do that here. We know that Rob is within the CA brand team for Total War. We also know that from Volan's video, these are the people who go to Sega and secure funding and subsequently control how that funding gets spent. But what that video doesn't explain is how in a system like the one CA is in, like how that relationship operates. So and I can't believe I'm saying this, but to Rob's credit, there is a looming cloud hanging over any project because it needs to prove profitability or have funding pulled. I mean, this is what happened to Thrones of Britannia, which has a DLC slot but no DLC, and later to Three Kingdoms, unfortunately. So back to my own experiences, I can definitely relate to this situation. I was actually a loss prevention manager in a hotel who had one of its investors change hands right before opening. Now, many of the proposed jobs from the prior investor were already filled. These people were already promised these jobs. And the hotel, to maintain those jobs, oversold their ability to turn a profit to this investment firm. Now, if you have worked in the hotel industry, then you probably know that return on investment is going to usually be a 2 to 3 year period before you really start seeing money out of it. And during the first busy season, it seemed like everything was fine. But as business began to shrink, as it does, so too did the faith of the tertiary investor. Because of this investor, the hotel was expected to show profit rather than being realistic. The hotel then was forced to start cutting back positions, diminishing roles to part-time even though they were critical, because revenues were down. It sounds familiar to costs being up, right? So personally, I left the hotel because I felt that the leadership's decision not to tell people that they employ and subsequently fell under my leadership, that were already going from paycheck to paycheck, that they were about to be destitute. And that they weren't even going to have enough hours to sustain their insurance minimums. After months of outright toxic behavior, that was definitely enough to destroy my loyalty to them. But going back to CA, I would say that like my old bosses, Rob came across as an arrogant tyrant who doesn't care about the people he works with or the community at large. And based on reports, that's likely accurate. But when he says, "You don't buy, we don't make," that's not a threat, that's a warning. Because like the investor at my hotel, Sega can and will pull funding from Total War Warhammer, and with the performance of Pharaoh, maybe Total War in general. Of course, we knew that we were going to talk about Pharaoh. And to say that the situation isn't bad would kind of be flying in the face of reality. I personally own a copy of Pharaoh, and while I can see the merits of the game, I would be lying to say that I have been incredibly tempted to play it. As I said when the game was first announced, I have very little interest in the time period and the kind of limited scope. Anything before Antiquity is hard for me when it comes to getting into battles, and that's really what Total War is about. That said, this is where I turn to the community and say the wider disdain for what is happening with CA is directly affecting this game. And honestly, it's a pretty solid game. Does it have issues? Would it be a modern game or a Total War game if it didn't? Of course it's got issues. But all in all, this is a solid game when you look at it on its own. In fact, I was speaking to another creator about it just the other day, and we agreed that had Paradox come out with this title, or CA Sophia been a standalone company, content creators across the spectrum and a majority of the community would be saying it's a solid game with a bright future and CA should be shaking in its boots because there's finally a solid competitor. Instead, because it's just another Total War title, it has to carry all the baggage that comes with that. Something that I've actually noticed that our community loves to do is compare every CA project against, 1, the nostalgic days gone by, 2, the amazing work done by the modding community, the ones who are more talented than myself, and worst of all, the imaginative musings of what could have been. I don't like the game because of the time period. I don't like the game because the scope's not big enough. I don't like the game because it's a Troy clone. I don't like the game because CA has been treating its consumer base like crap and, I'm just going to punish them. And these are all fair arguments to have. But with our community in such open revolt, and some in the community taking it so far as to purchase the game solely to leave negative reviews, go after content creators for playing the game, comment on CA's every post and flood every forum with spiteful rhetoric. All this stuff on top of those same content creators who praised and enjoyed the series from this, turning around and joining in the chorus of the drama. I mean, whether these actions are justified or not, it makes people who are more or less passive fans of the series and possible newcomers steer away from the games altogether. It's like when you hear people arguing with the staff in a restaurant. Regardless whether you think the restaurant wronged this person or you think the complainer's just being an ass, you are enticed not to continue patronage if that person happens to regularly be there and arguing with the staff every time you're at the restaurant. This constant negativity will make you not come back even faster than a dip in quality or a raised price. This isn't to say that the community is to blame for the lackluster performance of Total War Pharaoh. As I said before, there are plenty of justifiable reasons not to purchase the game, but to those doomsaying or cheerleading the failure of the game, the community is not just a victim, but it's an active participant in the direction of the series. Now that we are cut up on the drama, I feel like we should talk about what this means for the future and a way forward if there still is one. We have the fortune to look at the issue in a larger scope, and once again, I have to refer to Voland, but the root issue of so many of Total War's problems doesn't come from an unwillingness to listen to fans, bad publicity, or the lack of talent and innovation. It lies in the word tech debt. Now, if you haven't heard that phrase before, then I'm sure you will, because it's the newest hot phrase to throw around the Total War community. Tech debt in this situation is Total War's continued building on the Warscape engine without allowing the time to work out the issues within the engine or scrap it for a better one. I won't go over the list of issues within the engine, as I don't want to misrepresent my own knowledge on the subject, but suffice to say that there are limitations and bugs that remain persistent because the people who are meant to solve these issues are unable to dedicate the time to do so because they're constantly being pulled to other projects. Now, rather than invest in a long-term solution like stripping the engine down and starting fresh or building a new one, CA instead forked or branched off of other titles. Warhammer was branched off of Attila, which was branched off of Rome. Troy was branched off of Warhammer, and Pharaoh is so closely tied to Troy that Troy's code is literally the base of Pharaoh. You can see how this comes with a ton of issues just based on the release of Warhammer 3, which, I mean, took 6 months just to get in a place where it wasn't atrocious, and still doesn't have all the fixes that Warhammer 2 had by the end of its life cycle. This is due in part mostly to the need of CA to constantly be releasing content on top of its already overloaded and creaking system. To fix this, CA would need to dedicate finances and man hours into fixing the system, or building or buying a new one like Unreal Engine 5. Although with the current outlook of Sega, such an investment is it's going to have to come from other projects rather than asking for it. But I believe, as many others do, that this is what needs to happen to make the next tentpole release into one that can bounce the company back from success after so many failures. That being said, if CA feel or don't have a choice but to build branches off of games, then I would suggest building the next one off of Three Kingdoms, where the level of investment was obvious and strangely hasn't translated into the games that we have now. I was not great at 3K, as I have mentioned, but I recognize that many of the campaign layer improvements were a level beyond anything we have had before or since. The AI didn't feel completely moronic, and while of course there were issues and bugs, it was a solid game, and many were devastated to see it come to an end so abruptly. Building a Medieval 3 off of that system would not only bring back many of the players who were lost over the years, but allow for easy DLC content, bringing factions and time periods that would be, slam dunks for a company that desperately needs a win. A massive success like that could set up for more Total War investment. And another easy win in the series would be an Empire 2 or Victoria Total War, whichever title they wanted to go with on that, bringing naval warfare back into the game and expanding over an entire globe using the same concept as Immortal Empires. Now, Total War has an opportunity to make a resounding comeback, and call me a shill or a white knight or whatever you want to, but I want the game series that has remained a staple in my life to continue to thrive like it did in the past. Whether that be through fantasy, historical, or even a rumored 40k title, I want CA to continue giving me entertainment for years to come. I want the community that I love to come back from this hyper focus on every little misstep of a poorly worded post that a CA representative makes. I think we can do it. We can come back to being in a positive place where people are genuinely excited to see what's around the corner, and the team at CA are genuinely excited to make it. It's going to be a bumpy ride for a while, but I'm going to stick it out in hopes for a brighter future, and I hope you all will join me. And as always, to all of my friends, wherever you are, good morning, good evening, and good night. Thanks for watching.